The Shaw character is a man of experience, and you don't get to do that in your 20s. You know, you need to build and same with, the Hobbs character. This is a guy who's been there, done that.
Jason Statham built his entire Hollywood reputation on discipline, professionalism, and staying out of drama. Unlike many action stars, Statham rarely gives interviews filled with complaints, never overshares, and almost never publicly attacks co-stars. Which is exactly why the stories surrounding these 6 actors shocked Hollywood. Behind the explosions, billion-dollar franchises, and carefully managed press tours were real tensions that became impossible to hide. Some clashes were caused by ego, others by work ethic, and behind-the-scenes power struggles that changed entire productions. One feud reportedly became so serious it affected the future of the Fast and Furious Presents Hobbs and Shaw universe itself, while another left entire film sets divided behind the cameras. Number 1. Vin Diesel. Few names in Hollywood carry the commercial weight that Vin Diesel carries inside the Fast and Furious franchise. Diesel built Dominic Toretto from a modest street racing character in 2001 into one of the most globally recognized figures in blockbuster cinema history. The franchise has grossed over $7 billion across its run. Diesel is not simply the star. According to multiple documented reports, Diesel operates as a co-producer with direct influence over scripts, casting decisions, and the direction of storylines across every single installment. That level of institutional control is precisely where the tension with Statham reportedly began. Statham entered the Fast and Furious universe as Deckard Shaw, the villain introduced in the post-credits sequence of Fast and Furious 6 in 2013. The character arrived with immediate cultural impact. Sharp, ruthless, technically trained in genuine combat disciplines, Shaw represented a fundamentally different kind of threat from anything the franchise had previously placed against the Toretto crew. When Furious 7 brought Statham in as the full primary antagonist for an entire film, the result was over $1.5 billion globally, making it the highest-grossing entry in the franchise at that point in history. The production problem, documented in reporting by the Wall Street Journal and confirmed by multiple industry insiders over the years that followed, was the punch-counting system that governed every combat sequence across the franchise. Diesel had reportedly developed a practice over multiple films of assigning numerical values to every blow the Toretto character received during any fight sequence. A producer, reportedly Diesel's sister Samantha, tracked the precise count on behalf of the star throughout production. The entire operational purpose of the system was to ensure that Dominic Toretto never appeared to lose any physical confrontation, regardless of what the narrative required in that moment, or what the stunt team had designed to serve the story being told on screen. The system sounds extraordinary when viewed from outside Hollywood, from inside a franchise worth billions of dollars, where the central character's near-mythological invincibility is a foundational part of the product being sold to a global audience, film after film. The commercial logic is at least understandable, even if the creative cost it imposes on the production is severe. When Statham and Dwayne Johnson joined the franchise as significant physical presences, both actors reportedly followed the precedent Diesel had established and secured similar protective clauses in their own contracts. The result was a production-level catastrophe for every stunt coordinator assigned to any film featuring all 3 men. Fight choreography that should be designed entirely to serve the story and the characters became a mathematical negotiation between 3 separate legal teams, 3 separate definitions of acceptable outcomes, and 3 complete sets of ego protection infrastructure running simultaneously. Statham addressed the situation publicly with characteristic restraint during promotional work for Mechanic Resurrection in 2016. Asked directly about tensions on the Fast and Furious sets, Statham delivered the position simply and without elaboration. Staying out of any bickering or troubles between other parties was the personal standard, and no press tour question was going to change that standard. What the carefully measured answer notably did not include was any contradiction of the widely circulated reports that the bickering existed at a significant, production-affecting level over multiple films. Industry insiders with first-hand knowledge described the fundamental tension as a collision between incompatible professional philosophies operating inside the same commercial machine. Statham arrived from a background in real competitive sport and a career built entirely on practical stunt performance. The Shaw character was constructed from the beginning to reflect those genuine physical capabilities, and the authenticity of the action sequences built around Shaw was a central quality of the character. Diesel arrived as the architect and ongoing guardian of a franchise mythology built around a single character's invincibility across more than 2 decades of storytelling, and protecting that mythology was a production function as much as a personal preference. By Fate of the Furious in 2017, the situation had escalated to the point where Universal Pictures made a structural decision that insiders described as crisis management rather than creative opportunity. Statham and Johnson were effectively separated from the main franchise and given the Hobbs Shaw spin-off in 2019. The professional relationship between Statham and Diesel continues to function when the franchise schedule requires it. The underlying tension has never been publicly resolved. Number 2. Dwayne Johnson. Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham are, by almost every professional metric, natural creative partners. Both men built careers on physical authenticity, genuine training backgrounds, and the kind of commanding screen presence that does not require dramatic decoration to hold an audience. Both men produced a commercially successful film together in Hobbs Shaw. Both men clearly respected each other's professional capabilities at a fundamental level. And both men, according to every account from people who observed them during the main Fast and Furious productions, found real and sustained friction simply from occupying the same professional space within the franchise's complex power structure. The documented root cause was reported by the Wall Street Journal in coverage that generated more industry discussion than almost any other story about action franchise economics in recent years. Johnson reportedly secured a no-lose clause across the Fast and Furious film contracts. The clause established specific conditions governing how Luke Hobbs could be depicted in any combat situation across the films. Hobbs could not be shown losing a confrontation. Scenes where Hobbs appeared at a physical disadvantage required precise contractual conditions about recovery time and outcome framing to ensure the character consistently read as dominant to the audience. Johnson had observed Diesel's existing system and applied the identical protective logic to the Hobbs brand. Statham had a parallel version of the same protection in place for Deckard Shaw. When Shaw and Hobbs shared screen time across Furious 7 and Fate of the Furious, every physical interaction between the two characters became a full production-level negotiation that had to be resolved legally before any creative work could begin. Stunt coordinators designed sequences. Legal teams reviewed every designed sequence against the language of both contracts simultaneously. Modification requests arrived. Redesigned sequences were submitted. The cycle consumed production time and creative energy that the actual craft of building action cinema requires. Statham later reflected on the experience of working within that framework in terms that were professionally measured in delivery, but unmistakably direct in meaning. The design of a fight scene should require physical creativity, technical collaboration, and genuine partnership between performers and stunt professionals who understand what the sequence needs to achieve dramatically. The system in place replaced that creative partnership with contract arithmetic that served protective purposes rather than storytelling ones. The tension between the two men was further complicated by the full eruption of the Johnson and Diesel feud that became public in 2016. Johnson's social media post describing unnamed male co-stars as unprofessional on the Fate of the Furious set was widely understood as a direct reference to Diesel. Statham found himself positioned precisely between two of the franchise's dominant personalities, with a developing professional relationship with Johnson through Hobbs Shaw, while simultaneously maintaining a working relationship with Diesel within the main franchise structure. Statham held strict neutrality throughout the entire public dispute without a single deviation. The stated position was identical in every interview regardless of how the question was framed. Staying out of bickering between other people was a personal standard that the size of the franchise or the scale of the personalities involved was not going to change. The discipline of that neutral position impressed industry observers who understood the genuine difficulty of maintaining it. Johnson acknowledged the respect that neutrality represented. The collaborative work on Hobbs and Shaw demonstrated what the two men could produce when operating in a separate creative structure without the franchise's competing pressures pressing down on every decision. Inside the main franchise, the dynamic between Statham and Johnson operated at the level of professional respect between two people with identical instincts about never being placed in a losing position on screen, which is precisely what made the coexistence structurally difficult despite the genuine mutual regard. Johnson described the situation honestly in separate interviews across multiple years. Two personalities, built around the refusal to lose operating in the same production, creates an energy that requires active, daily management. The respect was real and has remained real since the Hobbs and Shaw collaboration. The tension during main franchise productions was equally real and was never resolved simply through goodwill or professional courtesies. Number 3. Steven Seagal. Steven Seagal built one of action cinema's most recognizable careers on a specific and very clear promise to the audience. The Aikido background was genuine. The first films, Above the Law in 1988, Hard to Kill, Marked for Death, and especially Under Siege in 1992, delivered real commercial results and established Seagal as a top-tier action presence. The persona was constructed entirely around one idea. This man is the real thing. The fighting on screen reflects actual mastery developed through genuine decades of martial arts training and real-world application. The problem, documented across years of accumulated testimony from training partners, former colleagues on productions, and investigators who examined the biographical claims in detail, was the expanding distance between the promise being made to the audience and the reality that existed behind it. Statham addressed Seagal publicly and without diplomatic softening in an interview that circulated widely through the action film world and generated significant coverage. The assessment was precise. Seagal had turned martial arts into theater. The specific criticism focused not on narrow technical ability in a controlled training context, but on the broader practice of performing expertise for a public audience, rather than actually possessing the capability being claimed. For Statham, this distinction is not a minor professional preference. It is the entire moral foundation of credibility in the action genre. Statham came to acting from Great Britain's National Competitive Diving Program, competing at the 1990 Commonwealth Games. The transition from elite competitive sport into film work imported a relationship with performance that operates at a fundamentally different level from actors who develop physical skills specifically for camera. In competitive diving, the score is entirely and completely verifiable. There is no narrative management available. There is no punch-counting clause. The diver executes the dive and receives a score that reflects the actual quality of the execution, nothing more and nothing less. When Statham moved into action cinema with the Transporter franchise in 2002, the fight choreography was designed specifically around the genuine martial arts capabilities Statham brought to the production. When Spy was made in 2015, the physical comedy of the action sequences worked because the underlying body control was real and trained. The Expendables franchise cast Statham alongside Sylvester Stallone because both men brought verifiable physical credentials to roles that required the audience to believe in the capability being displayed. The credibility Statham holds across the action world is built on documentation rather than marketing. Every stunt coordinator, every co-star, and every director who has worked with Statham confirms the same thing. The preparation is real, the capability is real, and the execution on set matches the public claims. Seagal's response to the Statham critique arrived in the manner that had characterized Seagal's public responses to any form of challenge across multiple decades. The response was dismissive, self-positioning at a level of superiority that the career record and documented history at that point in time could not fully substantiate, and structured to cast doubt on Statham's standing to deliver the criticism at all. The response made the situation worse rather than better. By the time Statham made the statement, the documented record around Seagal's career had accumulated enough contradictions between the public image and the verifiable reality that a dismissive response to a specific and credible critique reinforced the original point rather than undermining it. Multiple prominent figures from the martial arts world backed Statham's assessment. The critique landed because it was specific, because it came from someone whose own credentials are entirely verifiable, and because the distinction being drawn between real skill and theatrical performance of skill is one that practitioners across every combat discipline recognize and care about deeply. The divide between the two men is complete and requires no ongoing maintenance, no shared project, no possible collaboration, and no professional context exists where the two fundamentally different relationships with the concept of authentic performance could coexist. Number 4. Shia LaBeouf. Shia LaBeouf is one of Hollywood's most genuinely complicated figures across any recent era of the industry. The career encompasses even Stevens through Transformers blockbusters, genuinely acclaimed dramatic work in Disturbia and Honey Boy, and art world projects that divided critical opinion sharply. The underlying talent is real and has been recognized by credible people across the industry. What accompanied the talent throughout the career, documented in extensive public record, is what created the reported friction with Statham. Statham and LaBeouf reportedly came close to sharing a project that never moved beyond development conversations. The combination dissolved at an early stage, with Statham's assessment of the creative pairing apparently not aligning with the studio's enthusiasm for bringing both men into the same production. LaBeouf's awareness of that professional judgment and the response that judgment generated reportedly created a lasting tension that found its way back through the industry network, connecting working professionals in the action and thriller space. The core of the conflict follows the pattern consistent with every other name on this list. LaBeouf built a public identity around extreme method acting approaches applied across multiple high-profile productions. The commitment involved staying in character for extended periods on set, refusing conventional professional interactions while in character, and creating conditions around the performance that prioritized the individual artistic process over the shared professional conventions governing a working production environment. Multiple productions reported that the method approach generated disruption rather than creative electricity for the cast and crew working in the surrounding space. The disruption was framed by LaBeouf's camp as evidence of artistic seriousness. The people absorbing the disruption described the experience differently. Statham's professional philosophy operates from a completely opposite foundational premise. The standard Statham maintains consistently across every production is that preparation happens before the set day begins. Precision and execution define the value brought to the set each day, and every choice made by every performer reflects a responsibility to the entire working community of the production. Camera operators, lighting technicians, sound engineers, supporting cast members, and every other professional whose time is being used during a shooting day deserve a working environment where the star's personal artistic process does not consume their professional time without consent or compensation. LaBeouf's method framework positions convention disruption as artistically necessary and morally defensible. Statham's discipline framework positions the same disruption as a failure of professionalism that costs real money and disrespects real people who are doing their jobs. Both frameworks are internally consistent. They are entirely incompatible when placed in the same production. LaBeouf has addressed behavioral patterns from earlier periods of the career in later public statements that reflected genuine personal reckoning. The record from the period overlapping with the reported Statham situation reflects a different chapter in the biographical timeline. The reported response from LaBeouf to the professional evaluation framed Statham's technical discipline as a limitation rather than a strength, suggesting that precision-based action performance represents a lesser category of craft compared to the psychological depth that method immersion supposedly accesses. The two men have not shared any production. The professional distance has remained stable and quiet. Number 5. Jared Leto. Jared Leto won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for Dallas Buyers Club in 2013. The performance was a complete physical and psychological transformation executed at a level that earned every piece of recognition it received. The craft demonstrated in that performance is genuine and remains beyond reasonable criticism. The broader pattern of professional conduct that the method acting approach produced across subsequent productions is what created the reported conflict with Statham, and the single early meeting that reportedly ended any professional possibility between the two men stands as the most concentrated illustration of why no shared project was ever going to survive the combination. Leto arrived at a development conversation for a project that never advanced to production in a state of full character embodiment. The character being discussed was for the project under development, a project that had not been greenlit, had not been formally cast, and existed at the stage of early creative conversations between professionals evaluating whether a collaboration made sense. The character immersion meant arriving without standard professional acknowledgments, refusing to respond to the actual name, declining the basic social conventions that structure any business meeting between working professionals, and requiring the environment of the conversation to reflect the character being considered rather than the professional context of the meeting itself. Statham's response, according to accounts from people familiar with the incident, was immediate and clean. The situation was recognized for exactly what it was, treated accordingly, and the meeting ended without a continuation. The position Statham has articulated across multiple interviews about method acting broadly is consistent without requiring any specific name to carry the point. The distinction between genuine dedication to a craft and creating a burden for every professional who has to work around the artistic process is clear when observed from direct proximity, and the two things do not become the same thing regardless of how the performing party characterizes the behavior. The pattern that Leto's method approach produced on other documented productions provides the clearest possible context for why the development meeting went the way it reportedly did. During a show production in 2016, Leto reportedly sent used materials, including a dead pig and other disturbing objects, to cast members as a method of maintaining character immersion between shooting days. Cast members, including Will Smith and Margot Robbie, addressed the incidents in press interviews surrounding the film's release with the careful diplomatic language of performers who share ongoing studio relationships with the party in question. The discomfort beneath the diplomatic packaging was clear to anyone reading the responses carefully. The Joker method approach was presented publicly by the Leto side as evidence of serious artistic commitment that justified the behavior it produced. The people receiving dead animals in their trailers experienced the commitment from a different angle entirely. Statham's professional world operates from a foundational principle that every person on a production, regardless of their position in the credits hierarchy, has a right to a working environment that respects basic conventions of professional conduct. The character being performed does not alter the responsibility owed to the people sharing the workspace. No artistic justification changes that standard. Leto has constructed an artistic identity specifically around the idea that transgressing professional conventions signals genuine depth of commitment. The public positioning makes critics of the approach appear insufficiently serious about the craft. Statham declined to debate the philosophical framework. The meeting ended, and the project moved in a different direction. No ongoing public feud has developed because Statham declined to participate in any back and forth beyond the original departure. The position was communicated through action rather than through press statements. Leto's next project will generate the familiar cycle of character immersion coverage. Statham's next film is in production on schedule, with the crew reporting on time. Number 6. Mark Wahlberg. The Italian Job was released in 2003. The ensemble heist film placed Statham, Mark Wahlberg, Charlize Theron, Edward Norton, and Seth Green into a gold theft operation across Amsterdam and Los Angeles. The film earned over $176 million globally against a $60 million budget, performed significantly beyond commercial expectations, and stood as one of the more successful ensemble action films of the decade. What developed behind the cameras across the production was, according to reports from people who were on the set and from sources with direct knowledge of the production environment, a daily demonstration of two professional philosophies that could not reach a shared middle ground regardless of how much the story being filmed, required the two lead performers to function as a coordinated unit. Statham arrived with the preparation ethic that had defined the career from the beginning of the Transporter franchise 12 months earlier. The physical requirements of the Italian Job role, the precision demanded by ensemble action choreography, involving multiple performers working in close coordination, and the baseline professional respect owed to every crew member whose time and labor depended on the performers being ready when the shot was prepared were treated as foundational standards that no individual circumstance or personal schedule was going to adjust. Wahlberg arrived carrying the full commercial weight of one of Hollywood's largest celebrity profiles of the early 2000s. The music career that preceded acting, the modeling campaigns that built name recognition before any film existed, and the string of significant commercial and critical hits from Boogie Nights through Three Kings and The Perfect Storm, combined with the expanding business and brand ventures that were already making the Wahlberg enterprise larger than any single production. The celebrity operation functioning alongside the film created a working presence that operated according to different time priorities than the rest of the ensemble. Reports from people on the Italian job set described a working dynamic where the momentum of the production was not consistently the primary priority for the top-billed performer. Business calls, brand management obligations, and the natural gravitational pull of a celebrity operation running in parallel with a film shoot created a rhythm on set that clashed directly with Statham's fundamental standard of complete professional presence during every scheduled moment of production. Statham's documented position on this specific quality of professionalism is consistent across every interview across the career. Time on set belongs collectively to the production and to every person whose labor is contributing to the day. Every delay is a real cost absorbed by every grip, gaffer, assistant director, and supporting performer waiting for the lead to be ready. The assumption that celebrity hierarchy permits certain performers to treat set time as elastic reflects an attitude about the relative value of different people's time that Statham has consistently rejected, regardless of whose name is above the title. Wahlberg has constructed one of Hollywood's most remarkable second-career business operations, with food ventures, production companies, fitness brands, and investment portfolios that collectively represent a business achievement well beyond anything the film career alone could have produced. The public identity built around that empire draws explicitly on the working-class Dorchester background, the street-level origin story, and the blue-collar grit narrative that defines the Wahlberg brand for the audience. Statham's documented observation about the gap between the blue-collar public image and the private jet business reality reflects the specific kind of professional frustration that surfaces when a performer's claims about who they are and how they operate do not correspond to observed behavior. Multiple subsequent attempts by producers to repair the two men have reportedly been independently declined by both. The film they made together was commercially successful. The professional relationship it produced has reportedly never recovered. The pattern nobody connected before. 6 conflicts, 6 completely different personalities, 6 different professional settings, and 6 different specific triggers that produced visible, documented friction with the most controlled and professionally disciplined action performer working in Hollywood today. But place every single name side by side and examine what actually connects them, and a pattern emerges that explains every conflict on the list more completely than any individual story does. Statham has never articulated this pattern directly in any interview or public statement, but the pattern is present in every documented conflict without a single exception. The Diesel situation was about a production system that prioritized franchise mythology and contractual ego protection over authentic physical storytelling and genuine creative collaboration. The Johnson situation was about competing contractual clauses that replaced stunt team creativity with numerical legal negotiation at the expense of the actual craft. The Seagal situation was about publicly presenting theatrical performance of fighting expertise as genuine martial mastery, making a promise to the audience that the underlying reality could not fully support. The LaBeouf situation was about an artistic philosophy that positioned personal method immersion above the professional conventions that protect every other person sharing the working space. The Leto situation was about a character commitment approach that transformed a professional business meeting into a personal performance without the consent or convenience of the other professionals present. The Wahlberg situation was about a gap between a publicly constructed identity built on working-class authenticity and a private behavior pattern that did not fully correspond to the values the image claimed to represent. Every single conflict, without exception, comes back to the same violation of the same standard. A performer prioritizing a personal version of the work, a personal brand, or a personal artistic identity above the shared standards and shared respect that a collective production requires from every participant. Statham came from competitive sport at the national level. In competitive sport, performance is verifiable. There is no protective clause available. There is no character immersion that changes the score. There is no brand management that adjusts the judges. The athlete executes, and the result reflects the execution, completely and without mediation. That foundational experience with verifiable performance explains every conflict on this list more precisely than any tabloid coverage manages to capture. Statham does not have a feud problem. Statham has an authenticity standard that the industry finds structurally uncomfortable because the industry runs on the careful management of the gap between public image and private reality. Every name on this list is that gap meeting the one person in the room who refuses to pretend the gap is not there. One consistent thread underneath every single conflict on the list. Jason Statham does not create drama for attention. Every clash on record is the same story told through a different personality. What happens when a standard built on verifiable performance meets an industry built on image management? Drop the name that surprised you the most in the comments. Like this video and subscribe for more stories that find the real pattern underneath the headline. See you in the next one.